Azure landing zones explained for mid-size companies. So, Azure landing zone implementation. It's something a lot of people ask about, and today we're going to walk through it step by step. Let's talk about next up. What is an Azure landing zone? An Azure landing zone is a pre-configured, policy-governed environment in Microsoft Azure designed to host production workloads securely at scale. It establishes the baseline architecture before any application goes live, how subscriptions are organized, how network traffic flows between on-premises and cloud, who has access to what, and which compliance controls apply across every workload. Microsoft's Cloud Adoption Framework defines the landing zone across 8 design areas including billing and subscriptions, identity and access management, network topology, resource organization, security, governance, management, and platform automation. You don't need to perfect all 8 before migrating your first workload, but you do need a deliberate decision about each one. Before a business moves into a new office, someone installs the electrical system, network cabling, and access controls. Nobody moves desks in first and runs cables afterward. A landing zone applies the same logic to Azure. You configure the infrastructure backbone, governance policies, and security controls before any workload depends on them. Let's talk about next up, why Azure landing zone implementation matters for mid-market companies. The business case for proper Azure landing zone implementation comes down to the cost of rework. Q Services has completed 500 plus Azure and Microsoft platform projects since 2014, and across those engagements, companies that skip the landing zone phase consistently spend more in security remediation and architecture rebuilds than those that invest 2 to 4 weeks in the foundation before migration begins. For mid-market companies specifically, that rework falls on a small team. A 200-person organization doesn't have a dedicated cloud operations group to fix architectural problems after the fact. When a security gap surfaces or a network topology issue creates performance problems, it's the same people who are already managing daily operations. Each sector adds compliance requirements that a landing zone must address before migration begins. Let's talk about now the 5 phases of Azure landing zone implementation. Across 500 plus Azure and Microsoft platform projects since 2014, Q Services has seen Azure landing zone implementation follow 5 consistent phases regardless of company size or industry. An Azure infrastructure assessment is where you find the issues that will block migration if not addressed early. This phase inventories on-premises servers, applications, dependencies, data volumes, and licensing. It answers 3 questions. A thorough assessment also catches circular application dependencies, legacy software on unsupported operating systems, and undocumented integrations between systems. These are blockers that cost the most to resolve mid-migration when teams are already committed to a timeline. Now, next up, how to migrate on-premise to Azure without costly rework. With the landing zone in place, migration can begin. Migrate on-premise to Azure work follows 3 patterns, and picking the wrong one for a given workload wastes significant effort and budget. Lift and shift to Azure means moving a workload with minimal changes, taking a virtual machine from your data center and running it as an Azure virtual machine with the same OS and application stack. This is the fastest migration path and carries the lowest risk. It makes sense for applications with complex dependencies not worth untangling, systems that need to exit a data center before a lease expires, and workloads that will eventually be decommissioned. Where it doesn't work, applications needing horizontal scale, monoliths with bottlenecks that containerization would fix, and workloads with licensing that becomes expensive on Azure VMs. Let's talk about moving on to Azure Security Assessment and Compliance. What midsize companies Mississippi Security is the area where midsize companies most often cut corners during migration planning, and the one where post-migration consequences are most severe. A proper Azure Security Assessment before migration identifies issues that become expensive after go-live. The most common findings in pre-migration assessments. Each of these is straightforward to address during landing zone design. Post-migration, they require workload-level remediation that takes longer, costs more, and carries service disruption risk. Next up, moving on to choosing your Azure consulting services and migration partner. Selecting an Azure consulting services partner is one of the most consequential decisions in a cloud migration. The wrong firm creates rework. The right Azure migration partner cuts your timeline and leaves you with an environment your team can actually manage. For a structured evaluation framework, Evaluating a Microsoft Azure consulting partner covers the 10 questions that separate capable firms from those that tell you what you want to hear. Ask for references from companies in your specific industry, ask to see a sample landing zone architecture they have delivered, and ask how they handle scope changes and unexpected assessment findings. When evaluating any Microsoft Azure consulting company, look for a Microsoft Certified Solutions Partner designation. This indicates the firm has met Microsoft's technical proficiency requirements across real client engagements, not just a marketing agreement. Next up, now, conclusion, your Azure Landing Zone implementation roadmap. Azure Landing Zone implementation is not the exciting part of a cloud migration. The exciting outcomes are faster applications, elastic scaling, and decommissioned on-premises hardware. But without the foundational work, those outcomes arrive late, cost more than planned, and come with security and compliance debt that takes years to resolve. The sequence that consistently works: assess your current environment thoroughly, design the governance and network foundation, build the landing zone with policy enforcement in place, migrate workloads and plan waves using Azure Cloud Migration Services appropriate for each application type, then optimize continuously for cost and performance. Following this sequence with the right Azure migration partner cuts timeline, reduces rework, and produces an environment your team understands and can manage. Security governance and cost optimization are both significantly easier to implement from a clean, well-governed foundation than to retrofit onto an environment that grew without structure. Q Services works with mid-size companies across healthcare, logistics, finance, and technology to design and execute Azure Landing Zone implementation. Contact our team to discuss your current environment and what a structured migration would involve.